"Get out of here! I didn't invite you!" my son shouted across the dining table, the table I'd been setting since 5 in the morning. For his birthday. For my boy. The words hit harder than any slap. I stood there, apron still tied around my waist, the smell of roasted lamb and baked apples thick in the air, the scent of love turned into humiliation. Around us, 30 faces froze, friends, co-workers, even neighbors, watching me as if I'd wandered into someone else's home. But it was my home. Every brick, every curtain, every inch of that tablecloth was mine. I felt the porcelain plate slip slightly in my trembling hands. The same plate my late husband, Richard, and I had bought with our first year's savings, a wedding gift that had survived 40 years, but somehow I hadn't. "Don't you get it, Mom?" Michael's voice cut again, sharp and careless. "That seat's already taken." Next to him stood his wife, Clarissa, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her painted lips curved into a faint, victorious smile, the kind that said checkmate without a single word. I looked around. The gold balloons I'd blown up at dawn floated mockingly above the table. The silverware gleamed. My mother's heirloom. Every sound seemed distant. The low hum of the chandelier, a glass clinking, a guest clearing their throat. My chest tightened. Not just from embarrassment, but from grief, deep and ancient. The kind that comes when love turns its back on you. Clarissa tilted her head. "Eleanor, maybe you could sit in the lounge instead. You'll be more comfortable there." Her tone was honeyed, but her eyes said something colder. That was the moment the world tilted. All the early mornings I'd spent sewing his uniforms, all the sacrifices, the dreams I'd shelved for his. They gathered like ghosts behind me. Watching silently, everyone expected me to cry, to apologize, to retreat quietly like a burden that had overstayed its welcome. But something inside me cracked open instead. Not pain this time, but clarity. I heard a voice from the woman I used to be, before the wrinkles, before the arthritis. "Lift your head, Eleanor Grace. They've forgotten who built this house." So I did. I set down the plate, untied my apron, folded it neatly, and walked toward the door. And just before stepping out, I turned, met every pair of startled eyes, and said softly, "Everyone, please, enjoy the party." Then I walked away. No one knew it then, but I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was stepping into a war. They thought I'd gone quietly, but that night, behind a locked bedroom door, I found something that changed everything. A secret buried under dust and betrayal. When I reached the top of the stairs, the sound of laughter still drifted up from below. Thin, tinny, like something artificial. I moved slowly down the hallway, my hand brushing the wooden banister Richard had varnished himself so many years ago. The smell of roasted meat lingered faintly on my clothes, but underneath it was something else. The scent of endings. In my room, I locked the door and leaned against it. The quiet hit me like a wave. That room. It was the only corner of the house that still belonged to me. The quilt on the bed, the framed photograph on the dresser. Richard's smile frozen in time. His eyes bright with pride. I sat on the edge of the bed, my knees weak, my heart pounding somewhere near my throat. I had dressed carefully that morning. A pale blue blouse, the pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 10th anniversary. Because I thought I was celebrating my son, how foolish I had been. I looked up at the mirror across the room. A woman with silver hair and red-rimmed eyes stared back. Her face was tired, her hands calloused. But behind those lines there was something fierce still alive, a spark that refused to die. My gaze drifted toward the old oak dresser, my grandmother's dresser, the one with the bottom drawer I rarely opened. Dust had gathered along its edge. I hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside lay a faded blue folder. I hadn't touched it in over 20 years. I carried it to the bed, sat down, and opened it carefully as if it might fall apart. Inside were papers yellowed with time, the house deed, receipts from repairs, bank slips, and at the very bottom, the transfer agreement, my name. And beside it, Michael's. I had added him as co-owner 15 years ago after Richard's accident. I thought I was protecting him, giving him a sense of security. A mother's gift of love, the lawyer had called it. I thought it meant family, not ownership. But that night, as music and laughter filled the rooms below, I realized what it really meant. It meant my love had been weaponized against me. I ran my fingers across my old signature, the ink faded but still strong. I remembered signing it smiling, proud, certain that my son would always take care of me the way I had taken care of him. Now, sitting alone, I understood. Sometimes the people you raise forget who raised them. But I hadn't forgotten who I was. Not yet. Downstairs, the celebration roared on. But by morning, the first crack in their plan would appear and I would be ready to follow it straight to the truth. By the time the laughter downstairs began to fade, the house felt foreign. Like someone else's life echoing through my walls, I could hear Clarissa's voice carrying through the vents, sweet and shrill all at once. Come on, everyone. Raise your glasses. To Michael. To family. To legacy. Legacy. The word twisted like a knife. I sat at my vanity, staring at the old photograph of my wedding day. Richard standing tall beside me, his hand wrapped around mine, our faces young and foolish with hope. Back then, I believed family was forever. I didn't know that love, when mixed with greed, can sour faster than milk in the sun. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Mom? Michael's voice. For a heartbeat, the years fell away. He sounded like the boy who used to call for me after nightmares. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Come in. The door creaked open. He stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes darting everywhere but my face. Do you want to come down for cake? Cake, as if sugar could sweeten what had just happened. No, thank you, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. I already ate. It was a lie. I hadn't touched a bite all day. He shifted, uneasy. Claire feels terrible. She didn't mean... I cut him off with a look. Did she tell you to say that? He hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. She just wanted everything to be perfect, he mumbled finally. And I ruined that perfection by existing, I asked softly. He flinched. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he struggled for words. Go back to your guests, Michael, I said, turning away. Enjoy your perfect evening. I closed the door gently, not slamming it, not shouting, just closing it the way you close a book you've read too many times. On the other side, I heard his sigh of relief, the sound of a man who thinks he's avoided conflict. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. That night, long after the lights downstairs dimmed and the guests had gone home, I sat by the window and looked out over the garden. The roses Richard planted had wilted slightly, their petals curling like secrets kept too long. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I planned. Because love doesn't die easily, but it learns to defend itself when pushed too far. By sunrise, I would start uncovering just how deep Clarissa's roots had spread into my home, and the truth waiting for me would turn grief into fire. By morning, the laughter was gone, replaced by the hollow stillness that comes after celebration. Empty glasses on the counter, a wilted bouquet on the table, and confetti sticking to the floor. Like forgotten promises, I came downstairs early, still in my robe. The sunlight poured through the kitchen window, but even light felt foreign now, like it no longer belonged to me. Clarissa was already there, barefoot, humming, her hair tied in a loose bun. She looked like she owned the morning. Oh, Eleanor, she said sweetly, not turning from the espresso machine. You didn't have to clean up. I told Regina to handle it. Regina, my housekeeper, whom I paid. I smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. Clarissa poured herself coffee in my porcelain cup. The one with the faded gold rim I'd used every day since my wedding. She didn't ask. She just sipped, then placed it in the sink without rinsing. That small act, that tiny disregard, said more than her 1,000 words ever could. I thought we'd go shopping today, she said casually. Maybe change a few things around the living room. The decor feels tired, don't you think? I looked past her into the dining room, at the curtains my mother had sewn, the rug Richard had chosen, the photographs I'd framed. Tired, I repeated softly. Yes, some things are. When she left the room, I touched the rug, fingers brushing its edges like I was saying goodbye. The invasion hadn't started last night. I saw that clearly now. It had been a slow erosion, year by year, moment by moment. First, the curtains replaced, then the portraits, then the rug. Each suggestion wrapped in politeness until one day I'd woken up and realized I was a guest in my own home. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the small shed behind the garden to fetch an old vase. Inside, under a top and boxes, I found my mother's embroidered tablecloth, crumpled, dusty, torn at one edge, and beside it, the framed photograph of Richard and me from our anniversary. The glass was cracked. It felt like standing over a grave. I held that frame to my chest and whispered, "They don't know, Richard." But I remember. I remember everything. That's when I saw it. A small cardboard box labeled storage. Inside were bills, dozens of them. Utility statements, tax reminders, late payment warnings, all addressed to me, unopened. Clarissa hadn't been paying them. She'd been hiding them. The air grew colder in that shed, heavy with realization. I wasn't living with manipulation anymore. I was living inside a quiet heist. That evening, a single conversation with a stranger at the property office would confirm my worst fear. My home was already slipping through my fingers. By Monday morning, I could no longer sit still. Something inside me was clawing to get out. That uneasy mix of suspicion and clarity that tells you a storm is coming, and you better not pretend it's just rain. Clarissa stayed in bed, scrolling on her phone, the faint sound of laughter echoing from upstairs. Michael had left early, his cologne still hanging in the hallway like the ghost of someone decent he used to be. I brewed coffee, poured it into a travel flask, and slipped out quietly before the house could notice my absence. The sky was gray. That in-between kind of gray that looks like indecision. I took the bus downtown, my old handbag clutched tightly against my side, and walked 3 blocks to the county property office. I had done this once before, decades ago. When Richard and I first bought the house back then, I'd been nervous, excited. This time I was trembling for an entirely different reason. The young clerk behind the counter couldn't have been more than 25. Neat ponytail, polite smile, a name tag that read Jenna. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you today?" "I need to pay my property taxes," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I think I'm 2 months behind." She nodded and began typing on her computer. Her fingers paused mid-keystroke. Her eyes darted from the screen to me, then back again. "You're Mrs. Eleanor Grace, correct?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Ma'am, are you aware that your property is currently under transfer review?" The world seemed to tilt. "I beg your pardon?" "Someone filed a deed transfer application 2 months ago. It lists you, your son, and a Mrs. Clarissa Grace." She frowned, scrolling. "It claims you gave verbal consent to transfer full ownership to them." For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. "Is it finalized?" I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. "Not yet," she said. "It's missing your signature. Without that, it can't be processed." A breath I didn't realize I'd been holding escaped my chest. "Can I get a copy?" "Of course. $15, and 10 agonizing minutes later I held the papers in my hands. Forged declarations, fake consent, fraudulent signatures, my son's handwriting, her lies. I stepped outside, the air sharp against my face. Across the street was a small park. I sat on a bench beneath an oak tree, the world spinning around me as life carried on. Children playing, birds chirping, the smell of hot pretzels wafting through the air. They hadn't just tried to erase my name. They'd tried to erase my existence. I made one phone call that day, to a man who had once handled Richard's estate. His words would turn my heartbreak into a battle plan. The park was alive with noise, children laughing, a street vendor shouting, the low hum of traffic. But inside me, everything was silent. Completely silent. I stared at the stack of forged documents in my lap. My hands shook as I turned each page. There it was again. My son's signature, neat and confident, right beside Clarissa's looping cursive. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd prepared for it, planned it. A cold wave rolled through my chest. I reached into my bag and pulled out my old phone. There was only one number I still trusted Mr. Alden. He'd handled Richard's accident settlement years ago. A man of quiet integrity. The kind who remembered birthdays and always sent Christmas cards when he answered. His voice was steady as ever. Mrs. Grace? It's been a while. It has, I said, forcing the words out through the tightness in my throat. I need your help. They're trying to take my house. There was a pause, and then the soft sound of his chair creaking. I'll be at my office in 30 minutes. Bring everything. When I arrived, the rain had started. A slow, steady drizzle that seemed to weep for me. Mr. Alden's office smelled faintly of old books and coffee. He took the file from my trembling hands and read in silence. Minute by minute, the color drained from his face. Eleanor, he said finally, this isn't just betrayal. This is fraud. They forged your consent. If this had gone through, you'd already be out of your home. I swallowed hard. Can they try again? He nodded grimly. They will. People like that, they don't stop until they've taken everything. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small black device. From now on, he said, record everything. Every conversation, every mention of the house, every whisper about money. We'll need proof, and you'll get it. His calmness steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt less like prey and more like a person again. I left his office with two things, the recorder in my purse and a new kind of fire in my chest. Not anger, not grief, but focus. When I returned home, Clarissa was sprawled on the sofa, painting her nails crimson. She didn't even look up. Hi, Mom. Did you have lunch? No, I said softly, but I've had a long day. She smiled without looking up. You always do. I smiled back, a small, secret smile. She had no idea. That night, behind a half-open door, I would hear the conversation that proved everything and catch them planning the final betrayal in their own words. That night, the rain hadn't stopped. It fell in soft, unbroken sheets against the windows, the kind of rain that made everything sound like whispers. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment, every laugh, every look, every lie that had slipped through their smiles. The clock on my nightstand read 11:47 p.m. when I heard the sound. Muffled voices, faint and cautious, coming from downstairs. My room sat just above the living room. The old house had a vent that carried sound perfectly, like a secret passage for words never meant to be heard. I slipped from bed, wrapped my robe around me, and crept into the hallway. The floorboards groaned softly under my feet, a warning I prayed the dark would swallow below. A warm light glowed through the crack in the door. I moved closer. She's getting suspicious, Clarissa's voice whispered. Sharp. Nervous, Michael sighed. She won't do anything. She's old, tired. You saw her face last night. She's done fighting. Still, Clarissa said, lowering her tone, we can't risk her changing her mind about the trust fund. Once we finalize the transfer, we'll put the house on the market. I already have a buyer in mind. The faster we move, the better. My heart stopped a buyer. Michael hesitated. Don't you think this is a little harsh? It's still my mother's home. Her laugh, soft and cruel, sliced through the air. Your mother had her chance. She could have moved into assisted living like a normal widow. But no, she had to stay here, haunting the place like a ghost. We're doing her a favor, really. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. I held my breath. Every instinct screamed to burst through that door to shout, to shatter the illusion. But Mr. Alden's words echoed in my head. Proof. You'll need proof. Slowly, I reached into my robe pocket and turned on the small recorder. Its tiny red light blinked faintly in the dark. Their voices carried on, smooth and steady now that they believed the night was theirs. They discussed figures, signatures, lawyers, every detail of their plan. And when they finally stood to leave, I slipped silently back into my room, the recording safe and running. I sat on the bed, clutching it to my chest, the rain still tapping gently against the glass they had declared war. But they'd forgotten something very simple. I built that home. I buried my husband there. And I wasn't leaving quietly. The next morning, I smiled at them over breakfast, the same calm, gentle smile I used when Michael was a boy. But this time, I was setting the trap. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the house wrapped in that fragile hush that follows heavy rain, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. I was already in the kitchen before either of them stirred. The smell of coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of toast I hadn't cooked for them in weeks. But that morning, I wanted normalcy, or at least the illusion of it. When Michael walked in, he looked surprised. Morning, he said carefully, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Good morning, I replied, cheerful, steady. I made your favorite, blueberry pancakes. He hesitated, glancing toward the stairs. Claire's still sleeping. Let her rest, I said softly. She must be exhausted from all the planning. He froze for half a second, then forced a laugh. Planning? I smiled. That gentle, grandmotherly smile that hides entire storms behind it. You know, your future. I'm sure you have big things ahead. He exhaled, relieved. He thought he'd dodged something. I poured coffee into 2 mugs and slid one across the table. The recorder sat hidden in my robe pocket, still safely loaded from last night. Mr. Alden would have what he needed soon enough, but I wanted one more layer, one final piece. Michael, I said, sitting across from him. Can I ask you something? Sure, Mom. If something were to happen to me, would you take care of this house? He looked at me, uncertain. Of course I would. Why? No reason, I said. I just wonder sometimes if you ever think about what your father built here. He shifted in his chair. Mom, I'm trying to do what's best for everyone. Claire and I reached across the table, touching his hand. You know what's strange? I said quietly. I used to look at you and see Richard, but lately I see someone else. He swallowed hard. Mom, please don't. I smiled again, kind but distant. Eat your pancakes, darling. They'll get cold. He looked down, defeated, and began to eat. Upstairs, I could hear Clarissa moving, the sound of heels clicking, drawers closing. She'd be down any minute. My pulse quickened, but my face stayed calm. Because I knew something they didn't, I wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. I was preparing for the endgame. That afternoon, I would walk into Mr. Alden's office with the recording, the final nail in their perfect little plan, and by the time the sun set, the first domino would fall. At the lawyer's office, a single playback of that recording would shatter their scheme. But what I didn't expect was the secret Mr. Alden had been keeping from me all along. By afternoon, the sky had turned a flat, heavy gray again. The kind that warns you another storm is coming. I clutched my purse tightly as I walked into Mr. Alden's office, the small recorder inside feeling heavier than gold. He looked up from his desk as soon as I entered, his kind eyes softening. "Mrs. Grace," he said, standing, "you look determined." I smiled faintly. "I brought what you asked for." We sat, the air between us humming with quiet tension. I placed the recorder on his desk, pressed play, and for the next 7 minutes, the only sounds in that office were the cruelly calm voices of my son and his wife, plotting, laughing, sealing their own fate with every word. When it ended, silence settled like ash. Mr. Alden leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "That's more than enough proof," he said. "We can stop them now, not just from taking the house, but from touching a single cent of Richard's estate." I exhaled, the relief sharp and hollow all at once. "Thank you," I whispered. But something in his eyes shifted, a shadow, faint, hesitant, like a truth he hadn't meant to share. "There's something you should know," he said carefully. "I wasn't sure when or even if I should tell you." My stomach tightened. "Tell me what?" He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, pulled out a thick brown envelope and slid it toward me. "I've been keeping this for nearly 5 years," he said. "Richard gave it to me shortly before he passed. He said, 'Only give this to Eleanor if things ever go wrong between her and Michael.'" My fingers trembled as I took it. The paper was yellowed at the edges, sealed with the wax Richard used for his letters. My name, Eleanor Grace, written in his unmistakable cursive. I opened it carefully. Inside were 2 documents. One was a will, rewritten and signed in his final months. The second, a handwritten letter. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, it means what I feared has come to pass. You've always loved too deeply, even when that love was unreturned. But I couldn't let our home fall into the wrong hands. The day I was taken to the hospital, I made a change to the deed. The house, every inch of it, is yours alone. No one can take it from you. Trust Alden. And if Michael ever forgets his mother's worth, remind him what legacy truly means. With all my love, Richard." The tears came quietly this time, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of love and vindication. Mr. Alden smiled gently. "He thought of everything, Eleanor. He really did." And for the first time in months, I felt the ground return beneath my feet. I left that office with my husband's letter pressed to my heart. But before I could even reach home, I saw a "for sale" sign being hammered into my front lawn. The bus ride home felt endless. The city blurred past my window. Gray buildings, flickering neon signs, the faint hum of lives moving forward while mine had stood still for too long. In my lap, I clutched Richard's letter like a heartbeat, his handwriting. The gentle loop of each word reminded me of safety, of a love that had never once wavered. When the bus finally stopped at my corner, I stepped out and froze. There, on my front lawn, stood a man with a hammer. A bright white "for sale" sign gleamed against the dying afternoon light. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the birds stopped singing. What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice calm but trembling underneath. The man turned, startled. "Ma'am, I was told to put this up. Orders from the homeowners, Michael and Claire Miller." Homeowners. The word sliced through me like a blade. "That's impossible," I said, stepping closer. "You can't sell what doesn't belong to you." He scratched the back of his neck. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." "Maybe talk to them? They said they're moving out soon, trying to sell fast." I felt my knees weaken, but I steadied myself. "Thank you. You can leave that sign where it is. I'll take care of it." He hesitated, sensing something in my tone, then nodded and walked off. I stood there for a long time, staring at that sign, its plastic surface reflecting the sinking sun. I could almost see my reflection in it. Tired eyes, wind-tossed hair, The face of a woman who had spent a lifetime keeping everyone else warm while she froze quietly inside. Not anymore. I pulled the sign from the ground in one swift motion. The wood creaked. My palms burned from the effort, but I didn't care. That patch of earth was mine. Richard's roses grew there, white and fragrant, the same kind he planted the day Michael was born. I wouldn't let strangers trample that soil. When I stepped inside, the sound of laughter hit me like an echo from another life. Claire stood in the hallway, phone in hand, dressed too elegantly for a Tuesday. Michael was beside her, signing papers on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" I asked quietly. Michael looked up, startled, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Mom, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted, "because I already know." I placed Richard's letter on the table between us, the paper trembling only slightly. "He left this for me. For us. And he saw through both of you long before I ever did." Their faces drained of color. The game was over. But as I watched their eyes shift from guilt to panic, I realized something far darker was coming. They weren't done fighting yet. The silence that followed my words was heavier than thunder. Michael's hand froze over the paper he was signing. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. The letter from Richard lay between us, its presence more powerful than any courtroom, any argument, any forged document they could conjure. Claire was the first to speak. "This doesn't mean anything," she snapped, voice trembling. "It's just a letter." "No," I said softly. "It's proof. Proof that this house and everything in it was never yours to take." Michael stepped forward, his face pale, his voice small. "Mom, please, it's not what it looks like." I met his eyes, the same hazel eyes that once looked up at me with wonder when he was a child, begging me to stay up just a little longer to tell him stories under the blanket fort we used to build in the living room. But that boy was gone. "What does it look like then?" I asked. "Because to me, it looks like betrayal dressed up as desperation." Claire laughed, sharp, nervous, cruel. "You think you can scare us with a piece of paper? Michael, don't just stand there. Say something." But he didn't. He just looked at me, eyes wet, guilt written across his face like ink on glass. Finally, he whispered, "Claire, stop." "What?" He turned toward her. "She's right. It is her house. It always was." Her expression twisted. "You coward! After everything we've planned, you're just going to let her win?" "This isn't about winning," he said, his voice breaking. "It's about what's right." She stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time, and not liking what she saw. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "You think she'll forgive you? She'll throw you out the second she gets the chance." I stepped forward, my voice steady as iron. "No, Claire, I don't throw people out, but I do stop letting them destroy me." Her jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least it'll be my regret, not yours." She grabbed her purse, stormed out the door, and slammed it so hard the windows rattled. Michael sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't know how far she'd go. You just forgot who you were," I said softly. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but growing closer. A storm was rolling in, washing the dust off everything. The house, the roses, maybe even our hearts. I sat beside him. "Michael," I said gently, "the truth hurts, but it also cleanses." He nodded, tears slipping down. "What do I do now?" "Start by telling the truth," I said. "To me, to yourself. But before dawn, I would learn one last secret, one that would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and forgiveness." The storm that night raged for hours, rain slamming against the windows, wind howling through the eaves like an old sorrow finding its voice. I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows over the photographs on the wall. Each frame held a piece of the life I'd built. Love, struggle, loss, and endurance. Michael was upstairs, pacing. I heard him moving from room to room, the weight of guilt creaking through the floorboards. When dawn finally came, the storm had spent itself, leaving the world washed and raw. I made coffee in my blue enamel pot, the same one Richard used to tease me about keeping even when it was chipped. The smell filled the kitchen, warm, grounding, familiar. I poured 2 cups and set one on the table opposite me. A few minutes later, Michael appeared, his eyes swollen, his face pale. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," I replied, nodding to the cup. "Sit. You look like you haven't slept." He sat. For a while, we just listened to the rain dripping from the eaves. Then, his voice broke the silence. "I read Dad's letter," he said, his voice trembling. "Every word of it. He believed in you, and I ruined everything he built." "No," I said gently. "You forgot for a while. But forgetting isn't the same as destroying. You can still rebuild." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, humility. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you grow into." A tear slid down his cheek. "I want to make it right, Mom. I want to start over." I reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand that once clung to mine when he was small, crossing streets, afraid of traffic. "You already have," I said, "by facing it, by staying." He nodded, wiping his eyes, and for the first time, I saw my son. Not the man who'd betrayed me, but the boy I raised, lost somewhere between greed and guilt, finally finding his way home. Weeks passed, and the house began to feel alive again. The laughter returned, softer, honest this time. I reopened my sewing room, and Michael helped me repair the leaky roof. We planted new roses in the garden, 1 red, 1 white, 1 yellow, for love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Every evening, I sat in my old chair by the window. The legacy chair, as I'd come to call it, the place where stories began and ended. That's where I started writing mine, not just for myself, but for the women who'd been silenced, dismissed, or forgotten under their own roofs. Because in the end, I learned something simple but powerful. You can lose your home, your peace, your name, even your family's love. But if you hold on to your dignity, you can rebuild everything from the ashes. And as the sun set beyond the garden that day, I whispered to Richard, I kept my promise. I didn't let our legacy be taken. Then I looked toward the door, the same one I once walked out of in silence, and smiled, because this time, I stayed. If life ever takes your voice, remember, your story isn't over until you decide how it ends.